All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Ryan, and I'm a kayaker from here in Vancouver. And my story today starts with this. It was April of 2010 when the Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded in the Gulf of Mexico, killing 11 people and starting what would become one of the worst environmental disasters of the decade. For 3 months, oil flowed uncontrollably into the Gulf of Mexico, affecting over 700 kilometers of coastline, doing irreversible damage to ecosystems, and costing millions of dollars in losses to local tourism and local fishing industries. It was about a month after this disaster first started that I first heard about this, the Enbridge Northern Gateway Pipeline. So, in May of 2010, a company called Enbridge applied to the Government of Canada to build their Northern Gateway project, which would be a set of twinned crude oil and condensate pipelines that would connect the Alberta tar sands to our north coast at Kitimat, and for the first time bring crude oil supertankers into our northern waters. Now, with their application came the promise of jobs and economic growth for BC. But with oil still flowing uncontrollably in the Gulf of Mexico, the idea of shipping crude across some of the most remote parts of our province, across salmon-bearing streams, and then loading it onto supertankers to be shipped out through the narrow waterways of our north coast, to me didn't really seem like a good idea. My friends and I started hearing lots about it in the media, both the promise of jobs and growth, and the risks of a spill. But although it was unfolding in what seemed like my own backyard, I had a tough time getting a grasp of the issues and really getting a real understanding of what was at stake. So, in the fall of 2010, a couple of friends and I decided to do something about that. Being a group of kayakers, we decided we were going to plan a trip. And in September of 2010, we set out on a 2-month, 900-kilometer kayaking expedition down the coast of BC, paddling from Kitimat all the way back to Vancouver. We did this in an effort to get a better understanding of the issues and to see for ourselves exactly what would be put at risk by this pipeline. Along the way, we brought some film equipment with us and shot a half-hour documentary based on our journey and our experiences on the coast called the Pipe Dreams Project that you can learn more about at thepipedreamsproject.org. So, I feel incredibly lucky to have been able to spend 2 months kayaking down the coast of BC because it's really one of the most incredible and beautiful places that I've ever been. Our journey took us through an area of the coast called the Great Bear Rainforest, where every day we'd be paddling through water surrounded by misty peaks and hanging waterfalls, be paddling through water so thick and brimming with salmon that it really felt like if you held out your arms long enough, one would jump right into your arms and you'd catch dinner. We'd wake up with wolf tracks around our tents, and every day be paddling amongst pods of killer whales and humpback whales. We'd share estuaries with scavenging bald eagles and sleep in the same fields as grizzly bears. It really was an amazing experience, and the coast of BC really is one of the last truly wild places on Earth. It's something that's harder and harder to find. So, on our journey, we had the chance to stop in a lot of the small local communities, and talk to people there about what they thought about the pipeline. We probably talked to hundreds of people along the coast about what they thought, and out of all the people that we talked to, we only met one person who thought maybe this pipeline would be a good idea. Everyone else was afraid that if this pipeline goes through and a spill happens, that it could mean losing their homes, their livelihoods, and their ways of life. Now, Enbridge will tell you that any risk of a spill is far outweighed by the jobs and economic growth it will bring for the province. Enbridge has promised to bring something like 3,000 jobs, up to 3,000 jobs, with the construction of their pipeline. But these are only temporary jobs during the construction phase of the process. The number of long-term jobs that this pipeline would bring for BC is closer to 200. And when you compare that to the thousands of jobs that already exist here that depend on a healthy environment, jobs in tourism and jobs in fishing, jobs that would be put at risk, the numbers don't really add up. So when a company wants to build a pipeline like this, they have to apply to the government. And when they do, it triggers something called a joint review panel. A joint review panel is a type of environmental assessment that's supposed to take an unbiased look at all the pros and all the cons and all the risks of a project like this and listen to what all the stakeholders have to say, so anyone that has anything to gain or lose from the project. We spent some time up in Kitimat before launching on our trip, and we had a chance to attend one of these formal hearings there. And it was a pretty powerful experience, because on a gray Tuesday morning in a sleepy little industrial town like Kitimat, there were hundreds of people rallied to show their opposition. There were so many people that wanted to address the panel that they had to extend the hearings by 3 days to accommodate all the speakers. The city of Kitimat is within the traditional territory of the Haisla First Nation, who have lived in the area for over 9,000 years, and today still continue the traditional practices of hunting and fishing and gathering and living off the land. The Haisla primarily live in a small community just outside of the city center called Kitimat Village, and we were honored to be invited into the community when we were up in Kitimat to spend some time there talking to the people, sharing food and stories, and even be blessed by their traditional elders for our journey. On the first day of the hearings, the chief counselor of the Haisla First Nation, Dolores Pollard, told the panel, "I'm in deep fear that the fate of all of my people and all the people here rests in your hands." For the people of the coast, there's not only a fear of losing their homes and their livelihoods if a spill were to happen, there's also a very real fear that although these are some of the people that probably have the most to lose in a project like this, there's not really a meaningful way for them to have any input over the future of the places they live and the places they call home. These so-called unbiased assessments approved 99% of projects. 99%. To me, that sounds like there's a pretty big bias that's weighted towards industry. Like our friend Gerald said, another Haisla First Nation leader, he said, "It's simply a matter of communities not really having a voice, not a real voice. It's a facade of a hearing." And what's worse than that is that even if the Joint Review Panel were to turn around and do something out of the ordinary and say, "Hey, this pipeline's not a good idea for BC, it's not a good idea for Canada," the federal government can turn around and override that decision anyways. And especially since coming into power as a majority party, the Harper government has made it very clear that they're intent on pushing this pipeline through and that they're not interested in things like the environment or listening to the input of Canadian citizens. They've cut all kinds of environmental protection laws, paving the way for big industry. They've dismantled the environmental assessment even further, making it even harder for citizens to provide input into decisions like these. They've cracked down on auditing environmental groups, making it harder for them to operate. They put a muzzle on federal environmental scientists, preventing them from sharing their findings with the public. They've labeled environmentalists as radicals and First Nations groups as adversaries, essentially calling their own citizens enemies of the state. They cut funding to the Coast Guard even after one of their own reports found that Canada is not ready to deal with a major oil spill on the water. And recently signed trade deals with China that mean Chinese investors will essentially have more power and more control over our natural resources than we will. Things are changing so fast in federal politics that it's tough to keep up, and it's tough to even know what it means to be Canadian anymore. And if the feeling of powerlessness wasn't strong enough already, in July of 2010, one of Enbridge's already existing pipeline, Line 6B, ruptured in Kalamazoo, Michigan, spilling 3 million liters of crude oil into the Kalamazoo River, the worst inland tar sands oil spill in history. So we went on our journey looking for a connection to these issues and a connection to this decision that's going to seriously steer the future of the direction of our province. And what we found is that people all along the coast, people who are right there on the front lines, were searching for that connection just as much as we were. There's so little room for people to have say in this decision around this pipeline. So if you're up against a pipeline company backed by millions of dollars of investments and a government that's not interested in listening to the input of its citizens, what do? What can you do? And that's what's amazing about this movement. There's so little room for people to have say in the future of the places they live and the places that they call home. People all along the coast and all across the province are coming up with some incredibly inspiring, creative, and powerful ways to stand up and be heard and take that decision-making power back into their own hands. Like our friend Gerald told us, there's a folk storm brewing. Folks that are threatened in the towns, they're standing up and they're being counted. And I want to share some of those ways with you today. There's our kayaking journey to start. We set out down the coast looking for a way to get involved, bringing some camera equipment with us, but not really having had any filmmaking experience, and kind of joking the whole time, we're kayaking down the coast. How is that really going to stop a pipeline? But the response that we've received and the support that we've had along the way has been so incredible and so overwhelming that it's turned into something bigger than I could have ever imagined. Our half-hour documentary has been featured in film festivals across North America. We've won multiple awards, and it's turned into a tool that people can use to engage with these issues across the country. But we're not the only ones to take on an adventure like this. Our friend Norm paddled 400 kilometers through the Great Bear Rainforest on a stand-up paddleboard to highlight the issues and bring attention to this pipeline. Filmmaker Frank Wolf hiked and biked the length of the pipeline route on land from from Alberta to Kitimat to again highlight the issues and create a film. All kinds of famous artists and world-famous photographers have ventured into the Great Bear Rainforest to capture the beauty of the pristine environment there and share it with the world. This issue has become so big that it's garnered all kinds of local media attention and even international media attention, being featured in high-profile places like National Geographic and Al Jazeera. We've even seen some very unlikely players get involved, including municipal governments and city governments across the province. We've seen unions and labor federations get on board to oppose the pipeline. We've even seen religious and church groups get involved in this very political movement. And despite the crackdown on environmental lobby groups by the government, they continue to push forward and hold all kinds of events and rallies across the province all the time. Just 2 weeks ago, thousands of people stormed the steps of the legislature in Victoria to stand up and demand that the BC government take part and try and protect its citizens against this pipeline. And despite the government trying to limit the input of citizens on a decision like this, this environmental assessment is turned into the biggest environmental assessment in history, with over 4,000 people signing up to speak to the panel. That's 7 times bigger than any other environmental assessment in history, in Canadian history. To me, that's a sign that we shouldn't be trying to limit the input of citizens on these kind of decisions, but we should be opening up the process. And in a historic display of solidarity, over 130 First Nations groups from across the province have banded together to sign what they call the Fraser Declaration, which is a declaration that calls on their traditional laws and charter rights to ban Enbridge and other tar sands pipelines from their traditional territories. I've been really inspired by the leadership that has come out of First Nations communities on this issue. Like our friend Karen said, Karen is a woman who lives in Bella Bella. She has 2 amazing kids, and she's actively involved with her community's school system. She told us, I've heard some people say that they'll be standing there right on the line, and we'll be standing there right behind them. And that's just it. It's the power of the people standing up and doing all these amazing and incredible things that, despite a pipeline backed by barrels of oily wealth and a government who's not interested in listening to its citizens, I've got lots of hope. There's so much social capital and momentum that's generated by this movement that I'm confident this pipeline is not going to go through BC. But only if we can maintain it. And it's up to you and me and everyone along the coast and across the province to keep stepping up. So, if you're looking to get involved, I want to help you with a way you can do that right now. You can get on your smartphones and use Twitter to tweet to the world and tell them what you think about the Enbridge Northern Gateway pipeline crossing BC. It's a small step, but every little bit helps to maintain and generate that momentum that we need to make this happen. And you can talk to me at the break and my friends who are here from Forest Ethics today about other ways you can get involved too. Because I think the best way for you to get involved is think about what it is that makes you passionate about the places that you live and the places that you call home, and use that passion to make a difference. Because whether it's sending a tweet, or starting a conversation around the dinner table, or kayaking down the coast for 2 months, this is history being made right here, right now, and you're already a part of it. These kind of movements shape who we are in BC. Greenpeace was started right here in Vancouver when a small group of people boarded a boat heading for Alaska to try and stop nuclear testing. When logging companies wanted to cut down some of the last remaining old growth on Vancouver Island, hundreds of people rallied in Clayoquot Sound. It ended up being the largest mass arrest in Canadian history at the time. And I want to say, when a pipeline giant wanted to build their pipeline through BC, we stood up to stop it. It's these kind of movements that shape our society. There's so much momentum and so much social capital that's been generated that I think we need to take this opportunity to look at the bigger picture and ask some of the bigger questions, like, where's our country heading? How do we treat our environment, our democracy? What do we want to drive our economy? Let's take hold of this opportunity and seek to drive lasting change. Thank you.